If you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you my marriage was unshakable. Rebecca and I were the kind of couple who finished each other's sentences, shared knowing glances across crowded rooms, and leaned on each other during the worst storms of life. We had been together for nearly a decade, building a life that felt like a fortress against the chaos of the outside world. Our dynamic was seamless, or so I thought. She worked as an operations manager for a mid-sized tech company, a role that demanded precision and leadership. I admired her for her ambition, her sharp mind, and the way she could handle challenges with grace. My own career in project management kept me busy, but we always made time for each other. Or at least we used to. Things began to change subtly, the way cracks form in a wall before they become noticeable. Rebecca started working late more often. Her phone became a permanent extension of her hand, and her laughter, that infectious, genuine sound I had fallen in love with, seemed to fade. I told myself it was stress. Her company had taken on a massive new client, and she spoke often about the endless meetings, the tight deadlines, and the pressure to perform. I wanted to believe her, but something in her tone made me wonder if there was more she wasn't saying. One evening, Rebecca came home later than usual, her face flushed and her movements hurried. She brushed off my questions with a brief explanation about a last-minute presentation. I didn't press her, though I noticed she barely ate her dinner and seemed distracted throughout the evening. When I asked if everything was okay, she smiled faintly and said she was just tired. Later that night, while she showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen, my curiosity getting the better of me. The message preview read, "Can't stop thinking about earlier. You looked amazing." The sender was simply listed as C. My stomach twisted as I stared at the screen, the words burning themselves into my mind. Who was C? What had happened earlier that someone couldn't stop thinking about? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the seed of doubt had been planted. In the days that followed, Rebecca's behavior only deepened my suspicions. She was on her phone constantly, her messages punctuated by quick glances in my direction to see if I was paying attention. When I asked about her day, her answers were vague, filled with corporate jargon that made it impossible to follow. She started dressing more carefully for work, her outfits sharper, her makeup more pronounced. I told myself it was part of her professional image, but the changes felt too sudden, too deliberate. One Friday evening, she mentioned a work dinner to celebrate the progress of the new project. I offered to drive her, but she insisted it was informal and that she'd take an Uber. When she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her tone, her smile, the way she avoided my gaze. It all felt rehearsed. An hour later, I decided to follow her. It was a decision I'm still not sure I'm proud of, but the need to know outweighed the guilt. I drove to the restaurant she had mentioned, parking a few blocks away. From my spot, I watched as she arrived, laughing and chatting with a group of colleagues. Among them was a man who seemed to command her attention. A tall, confident figure who leaned in close as they spoke. My chest tightened as I watched their interactions, every gesture and glance fueling my unease. I later learned his name, Colin. He was new to her team, brought in as a senior consultant to help streamline operations for the big client. Rebecca had mentioned him in passing a few times, always in glowing terms, his expertise, his leadership, his ability to handle pressure. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now those comments took on a different weight. The next day, while Rebecca was out running errands, I did something I had never done before. I looked through her laptop. It was a violation of her privacy, and I hated myself for it, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion any longer. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Hidden in a folder labeled Work Notes were screenshots of text messages between her and Colin. The messages were casual at first, filled with jokes and work-related banter. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Just thinking about you makes this day bearable. Last night was incredible. I haven't felt this way in years. I'll cover for you if anyone asks. You deserve some time for yourself." Each message felt like a knife to the chest, the words confirming what I had hoped wasn't true. This wasn't just a harmless flirtation. It was an affair, and it had been going on for months. I began piecing together the timeline, correlating her late nights and work dinners with Colin's presence. The patterns were undeniable. Whenever she claimed to be working late or attending a team event, he was there. I found more messages, photos of them together at conferences and team-building retreats. In one photo, taken at what appeared to be a hotel lounge, Rebecca leaned into Colin's side, her smile radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more than just screenshots and circumstantial evidence. I needed to understand the full scope of their relationship, to know how deeply the betrayal ran. So I waited, watching, gathering information, all the while pretending everything was normal. It was exhausting, living in a state of hyper-awareness, but the alternative, confronting her without all the facts, felt like stepping into a battle unarmed. One evening, Rebecca's phone buzzed while she was in the shower. This time, I didn't hesitate. The message was from Colin, room 412. Can't wait to see you. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen, the confirmation hitting me like a tidal wave. She wasn't just cheating. She was with him in a hotel room while I sat at home waiting for her. I didn't know what to do. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness. It all threatened to consume me. I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down, suffocating me. But amidst the chaos of my emotions, a plan began to form. If Rebecca wanted to live a double life, I would make sure she couldn't hide from the consequences. The morning after finding Colin's message, I sat at the kitchen table staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Rebecca moved around the house as though nothing was wrong, humming softly as she prepared for work. I watched her carefully, searching for any signs of guilt or hesitation. If they were there, she hid them well. The weight of what I had discovered settled heavily on my chest. She wasn't just lying. She was constructing a life that excluded me. Yet despite the pain, I still hesitated to confront her. I needed to be sure of every detail before I acted. The anger in me simmered, but it wasn't ready to boil over. Not yet. That evening, Rebecca mentioned another late meeting, her tone casual, her explanation rehearsed. She kissed me on the cheek before she left, her perfume lingering in the air like a taunt. This time, I didn't wait at home. I followed her. Her car led me downtown, weaving through traffic until she pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I watched her enter, her phone in hand, her pace unhurried. I parked a few spaces away and waited, my pulse pounding in my ears. An hour passed before I saw him. Colin emerged from the elevator, his suit immaculate, his demeanor confident. Rebecca followed moments later, her laughter carrying faintly through the glass doors. They didn't touch, but their proximity spoke volumes. They walked to the hotel's restaurant, their conversation animated, their smiles easy. I sat frozen, torn between the urge to confront them and the need to gather more evidence. My hands shook as I took photos, the camera on my phone capturing moments that felt like daggers to my heart. When they finally returned to the elevator and disappeared from view, I knew I couldn't stay. I drove home, my mind racing with thoughts of what might be happening behind closed doors. In the days that followed, I turned my attention to uncovering their digital trail. I accessed Rebecca's laptop again, this time with a clearer purpose. Mark's advice, a friend who had been my confidant during this ordeal, had been simple. Find proof that leaves no room for denial. The emails were there, hidden in a folder labeled drafts. They hadn't been sent, but the contents were damning. Messages outlining plans for secret dinners, weekends away, and even shared jokes about their coworkers. One message, in particular, stood out. I wish we didn't have to sneak around. I hate lying, but I can't imagine life without you. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just physical. Rebecca had built an emotional connection with Colin, a bond that felt deeper than what she now shared with me. My hands trembled as I saved the messages, each one a piece of the puzzle that was quickly coming together. Mark and I met for drinks that week, my head heavy with the burden of my discoveries. He listened quietly as I recounted everything. The messages, the photos, the nights she spent away. His advice was blunt but necessary. You can't sit on this forever. She's not going to stop unless you make her. I knew he was right, but confronting Rebecca felt like stepping off a cliff, unsure if I'd land on solid ground or plunge into an abyss. I needed one last piece of evidence, something that would make the confrontation undeniable, something she couldn't explain away. Rebecca's next excuse came the following Friday. She had a weekend retreat with her team, she explained, a bonding exercise meant to strengthen collaboration. Her tone was so convincing, her demeanor so casual, that I almost believed her. But the tension in her voice betrayed her, and I knew she was lying. This time I didn't follow her immediately. I waited until she had checked into the hotel before making my move. Mark had helped me rent a room at the same location, a floor above theirs. With a discreet camera in hand, I waited for the perfect opportunity. Came late that night. Rebecca and Colin emerged from their room, their body language intimate. They walked through the lobby, their hands brushing as they laughed about something I couldn't hear. My camera captured it all, the glances, the touches, the undeniable chemistry. It was irrefutable proof. When Rebecca returned home on Sunday, she greeted me with the same practiced smile, her tone light as she recounted the workshops and meetings she'd attended. I watched her closely, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. The time for silence was over. I placed the photos and emails on the kitchen table that evening, waiting for her reaction. When she saw them, her expression froze. For the first time in months, her mask slipped, revealing the guilt and panic she had worked so hard to hide. She tried to speak, but I raised a hand to stop her. The words I had rehearsed for weeks spilled out in a rush, my voice shaking with anger and betrayal. I told her about the nights I had followed her, the messages I had found, the lies she had told. There was no room for denial, no way to twist the narrative. The evidence was undeniable. Rebecca sat silently, tears streaming down her face as I demanded answers. Her confession, when it came, was raw and unfiltered. She spoke of feeling unseen, of a connection with Colin that had filled a void she hadn't known existed. She begged for forgiveness, for a chance to make things right. But her words felt hollow, her remorse too little, too late. In the days that followed, I packed my belongings and moved into a friend's spare room. Rebecca called and texted constantly, her messages alternating between apologies and pleas for another chance. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. The trust that had once defined our relationship was gone, replaced by a chasm that felt insurmountable. Mark's support became my anchor during that time. He reminded me that healing would take time, that the pain I felt now wouldn't last forever. I clung to his words, even as the nights stretched long and the memories of Rebecca haunted my thoughts. The days following my departure from the house felt surreal. It was as though I were living someone else's life, a cruel parody of the stability I had once taken for granted. Rebecca's pleas for forgiveness echoed in my mind, but I couldn't erase the images of her and Colin from my thoughts. No matter how much I wanted to understand why she had done what she did, the betrayal lingered like a stain I couldn't wash away. I stayed with Mark for a while, his spare room becoming both a sanctuary and a reminder of how far I had fallen. He was patient, listening without judgment as I vented my anger, my heartbreak, and my confusion. But even his unwavering support couldn't dull the sharp edges of my pain. Rebecca's attempts to contact me became relentless. Every day brought a new message or voicemail, her tone shifting between desperation and determination. She wanted to meet, to explain, to try and repair what we had lost. At first, I ignored her completely, the thought of facing her unbearable. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to wonder if hearing her out might offer some kind of closure. When I finally agreed to meet, it was in a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop where the hum of conversation would keep the tension from boiling over. Rebecca arrived early, her face drawn and tired, the weight of the situation evident in her posture. She spoke earnestly, her words tumbling out in a torrent of regret and self-recrimination. She admitted that the affair had been a mistake, that she had been swept up in the thrill of something new and exciting. She claimed it had never been about replacing me, but about filling a void she hadn't known how to address. Her words were raw, her tears genuine, but they did little to soothe the ache in my chest. Forgiveness felt like an impossibility. In the weeks that followed, I became consumed by a need to uncover the full extent of Rebecca's betrayal. I wanted to know everything. Every lie, every meeting, every moment she had shared with Colin. It wasn't healthy, but it felt like the only way to regain some semblance of control over a situation that had unraveled so completely. Mark helped me dig deeper, his knack for uncovering hidden details proving invaluable. Together, we pieced together a timeline of the affair, matching hotel receipts and work events with messages and photos I had discovered. The pattern was clear. Their relationship had been calculated and deliberate, each encounter carefully planned to avoid suspicion. What I found most painful wasn't the physical aspect of their affair, but the emotional intimacy they had shared. Their messages spoke of dreams and plans, inside jokes and shared secrets. It was as though they had created a world where I didn't exist, a world that was brighter and freer than the one Rebecca and I had built together. As I delved further into the details, I began to see Colin for who he truly was. He wasn't just an opportunist who had exploited Rebecca's vulnerabilities. He was a manipulator who thrived on control. His messages to her were filled with subtle cues that reinforced his dominance, his charm masking a calculated effort to keep her under his influence. One discovery stood out above the rest. A folder on Rebecca's laptop containing documents that had clearly been shared with Colin. They included sensitive information about her company's operations, details that could easily be used to gain an advantage in negotiations or undermine her colleagues. The realization that their affair had crossed professional boundaries added a new layer of betrayal to an already unbearable situation. Armed with this new information, I decided to confront Colin directly. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but the need to face him outweighed my fear of the consequences. I found him at a networking event Rebecca had mentioned in passing, a gathering of industry professionals where his presence would go unnoticed by anyone who wasn't looking for him. Seeing him in person was jarring. He was every bit as charismatic as Rebecca had described, his easy smile and confident demeanor making it clear why she had been drawn to him. But beneath the surface, I could sense the calculation, the self-assuredness of a man who believed he was untouchable. When I approached him, his expression shifted from polite curiosity to wary recognition. I didn't raise my voice or cause a scene. Instead, I spoke calmly, outlining everything I knew about his relationship with Rebecca. As I laid out the details, his mask began to crack. He denied nothing, his silence confirming my suspicions. What struck me most was his lack of remorse. He didn't apologize or attempt to justify his actions. Instead, he offered a smug remark about how relationships were complicated and that Rebecca had clearly needed something I couldn't provide. His words stung, but they also revealed his arrogance, a fatal flaw I intended to exploit. Mark and I spent the next few weeks building a case against Colin. With Rebecca's reluctant cooperation, we compiled evidence of his inappropriate use of company resources and his attempts to manipulate her for personal gain. It wasn't just about exposing his affair with my wife. It was about holding him accountable for the harm he had caused. The fallout was swift and severe. Colin's company launched an internal investigation, his reputation tarnished by the revelations we brought to light. Rebecca, too, faced consequences for her involvement, though her willingness to come forward and own her mistakes earned her some leniency. It wasn't the resolution I had envisioned, but it was a step toward justice. As the dust began to settle, I found myself at a crossroads. Rebecca and I were no longer the couple we had once been, the trust between us shattered beyond repair. And yet, there was a part of me that still cared for her, that wanted to believe in the possibility of redemption. We continued counseling, not with the goal of saving our marriage, but of finding closure. Through those sessions, I began to see Rebecca not as the villain of my story, but as a flawed and hurting person who had made terrible choices. It didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me begin to let go of the anger that had consumed me. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not for us, but for myself. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but it was mine to take. And as I began to rebuild my life, I carried with me the lessons I had learned. About love, about betrayal, and about the strength it takes to move forward. After Colin's downfall, I thought the worst was behind me. I had expected closure, a sense of resolution to the chaos that had overtaken my life. But the aftermath was anything but clean. The fallout from Rebecca's actions and Colin's manipulations lingered like a shadow, haunting every step I took toward rebuilding my life. Rebecca lost her job shortly after the investigation concluded. Though her cooperation had spared her from the brunt of the consequences, her professional reputation was irreparably damaged. She moved back to her parents' home, a decision she described as a way to find clarity, but I suspected it was also an escape from the wreckage we had left behind. She continued to reach out to me, her messages filled with a mix of apologies and reflections. She spoke about how the affair had been a wake-up call for her, a moment of clarity that forced her to confront the cracks in her life. She asked if we could try to rebuild, to start fresh as two people who had faced the worst and survived. But I couldn't forget what had happened. Forgiveness was one thing, rebuilding was another entirely. Trust, once shattered, didn't mend easily. I told her as much during one of our rare face-to-face meetings. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears, and said she understood. It was the closest thing to closure we ever reached. In the weeks that followed, my focus shifted to rebuilding my own life. I returned to work, throwing myself into projects that demanded my full attention. Mark, ever the supportive friend, encouraged me to reconnect with old hobbies and passions. It was during one of these conversations that Claire entered my life. Claire was a mutual acquaintance of Mark's, a quiet yet fiercely intelligent woman who had recently started working in his office. She had heard about my situation through Mark and offered her support in an offhand, non-intrusive way. At first, our interactions were casual conversations about books, movies, and the absurdities of the corporate world. But over time, her presence became a source of comfort. Where Rebecca had been fiery and ambitious, Claire was steady and thoughtful. She listened without judgment, offering insights that felt less like advice and more like gentle nudges towards self-discovery. She never pried into my past, though I sensed she knew more than she let on. Her understanding felt genuine, a balm for wounds that had yet to fully heal. One evening, as Claire and I shared a quiet dinner at a local cafe, she hesitated before speaking. Her expression shifted, her usual calm giving way to something more serious. She admitted that she had something to tell me, something she had wrestled with for weeks. My chest tightened as I prepared for the worst. Claire revealed that she had once worked with Colin, not at Rebecca's company, but years earlier at another firm. Their paths had crossed during a high-profile project, and she had witnessed firsthand the lengths he would go to achieve his goals. She described him as a master manipulator, someone who thrived on control and deceit. Her words painted a picture that felt all too familiar. But it was what she said next that sent a chill down my spine. Claire explained that Colin had a pattern of targeting women in vulnerable positions, leveraging their insecurities to gain access to resources and influence. Rebecca, she believed, had been one of many. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. The affair hadn't been about love or connection. It had been another calculated move in Colin's playbook. Fueled by Claire's revelation, I decided to dig deeper into Colin's past. With her help and Mark's resources, we uncovered a trail of similar incidents. There were at least 3 other women who had fallen victim to his manipulations, their lives upended in the process. Some had faced financial ruin, others professional disgrace. None had come forward, likely out of fear or shame. I reached out to one of them, a woman named Laura who had worked with Colin years earlier. She was hesitant at first, her voice tinged with caution as she recounted her story. But as I shared my own experiences, her guard began to lower. She described how Colin had charmed his way into her life, only to exploit her connections and leave her to pick up the pieces when his schemes fell apart. Hearing her story was both validating and infuriating. It confirmed what I had suspected. Colin wasn't just a cheat. He was a predator who thrived on the destruction he left in his wake. The anger I had felt toward Rebecca began to shift, redirected toward the man who had orchestrated so much pain. Armed with this new information, I approached Rebecca one final time. We met at a park near her parents' home, the autumn leaves swirling around us as we sat on a weathered bench. I told her what I had learned about Colin, about his history and the other women he had hurt. Her expression was a mix of shock and disbelief, her hands trembling as she processed my words. Rebecca admitted that she had suspected something was off about Colin toward the end of their relationship. She described how his charm had given way to control, his promises of a brighter future replaced by demands that left her feeling trapped. She hadn't realized the extent of his deceit, but hearing it laid out so plainly forced her to confront the reality of what she had been a part of. It was a bittersweet moment. I could see the weight of her regret, the pain of knowing she had been used. And yet, there was a sense of relief in her acknowledgement, a small step toward healing for both of us. With Rebecca's cooperation, I helped connect the dots for the other women Colin had hurt. Together, we compiled a dossier of evidence that painted a damning picture of his actions. Claire used her professional connections to bring the information to light, ensuring that Colin's patterns of abuse were exposed. The fallout was swift. Colin's reputation, already damaged, was destroyed entirely. Legal action followed, though many of his victims chose to remain anonymous. For the first time, his reign of manipulation came to an end. It didn't erase the pain he had caused, but it was a step toward justice. As the chaos subsided, I found myself standing at the edge of a new beginning. Rebecca and I parted ways for good, our relationship too fractured to repair. But our final conversations were marked by understanding rather than anger. We had both made mistakes, but we had also faced the consequences and grown from them. Claire became a constant presence in my life, her friendship a source of strength and clarity. She reminded me that healing wasn't linear, that it was okay to carry scars as long as they didn't define me. Over time, our connection deepened, and what began as a friendship evolved into something more. As I look back on everything that happened, I'm struck by the resilience of the human spirit. Betrayal, heartbreak, and pain are inevitable parts of life, but so are growth, forgiveness, and the possibility of new beginnings. The journey was never easy, but it brought me to a place of peace I never thought I'd find. Months had passed since Colin's downfall, and life had settled into a new rhythm. The chaos that had consumed my world was now a memory, albeit a vivid and haunting one. The journey to this point had been arduous, filled with pain, anger, and moments of profound clarity. But as I sat on my apartment balcony watching the city lights flicker, I realized that I had reached a place of acceptance. The storm was over and I had survived. Rebecca had found her footing again, though our lives no longer intersected. She had moved to a new city, taking a position at a small nonprofit that focused on community development. It was a far cry from the corporate ladder she had once climbed, but she seemed at peace with her decision. We spoke occasionally, our conversations polite but distant. There was no animosity, only the quiet acknowledgement of a chapter that had closed. Claire and I had grown closer, our connection deepening into something that felt both comforting and exciting. She brought a sense of stability and warmth to my life that I hadn't realized I needed. Where Rebecca had been a storm, Claire was a calm harbor. Her presence reminded me that it was possible to heal, to find joy again, even after the most profound betrayals. One morning, as I sifted through a pile of mail, I came across an envelope with no return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the weight of the envelope suggested it contained more than just a letter. Curious, I opened it and found a handwritten note accompanied by several photographs. The note was from Laura, one of Colin's former victims. She wrote to thank me for reaching out and for helping bring his actions to light. Her words were heartfelt, filled with gratitude for the role I had played in exposing the truth. But it was the photographs that caught my attention. The images depicted Colin with a woman I didn't recognize, their interactions unmistakably intimate. The timestamps on the photos suggested they were taken months before Colin had entered Rebecca's life. It was clear that he had been juggling multiple relationships, each one a means to an end. The realization stirred a mix of emotions in me. Anger for the women he had manipulated, but also a strange sense of vindication. Colin's downfall had been inevitable. He had simply underestimated the strength of those he had wronged. Armed with the photographs, I reached out to Mark and Claire, who had been instrumental in our efforts to bring Colin to justice. Together, we decided to share the images with the other women who had been affected by his manipulations. It wasn't about reopening wounds, but about providing closure and reminding them that they weren't alone. The response was overwhelming. Messages of solidarity and shared experiences poured in, creating a network of support among the women who had once been isolated by their pain. Seeing them come together, finding strength in their shared stories, was a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Just when I thought I had seen the last of Colin, fate intervened. I ran into him unexpectedly at a coffee shop one rainy afternoon. He looked different, his once impeccable appearance now disheveled, his confident demeanor replaced by something resembling defeat. He noticed me immediately, his expression flickering between recognition and discomfort. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of our shared history hung heavy in the air. Finally, he broke the silence, offering a half-hearted apology for the pain he had caused. His words felt hollow, lacking the sincerity needed to mend the damage he had done. I nodded politely, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. As he left, I felt a surprising sense of closure. Colin no longer held any power over me or the others he had hurt. His fall from grace had been his own doing, a consequence of his choices. And in that moment, I realized that I no longer needed his acknowledgement or apology. I had moved on. Life continued, each day bringing new opportunities and challenges. Claire and I grew stronger together, our relationship built on trust and mutual respect. She understood the scars I carried and never tried to minimize them. Instead, she helped me see them as proof of my resilience, a testament to the strength it took to endure and rebuild. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Claire asked me what I had learned from everything that had happened. The question gave me pause, forcing me to reflect on the journey I had taken. I told her that I had learned the importance of boundaries, of recognizing when to let go and when to hold on. I had learned that love, while powerful, couldn't thrive without trust. And most importantly, I had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about finding a way to live with it and move forward. Months later, I received an email from Rebecca. She had heard about the support network we had helped create for Colin's victims and wanted to contribute in some way. Her message was brief but heartfelt, expressing gratitude for the role I had played in her journey towards self-awareness and growth. Her email marked the final piece of closure I hadn't realized I needed. It was a reminder that even in the aftermath of betrayal, there was room for understanding and forgiveness. Rebecca and I would never be what we once were, but we had both found our paths forward, and that was enough. As I closed her email, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined me. I had found love again, forged new connections, and discovered a strength within myself that I hadn't known existed. The journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.